Oi, eu sou a Maria Clara e eu tô aqui com a Camila. A gente vai entrevistar o Bayo Akomolafe hoje, que é professor no curso de Ativismo Sagrado aqui na Schumacher College, dentro do programa de Ecology and Spirituality.
My name is Bayo Akomolafe and I'm from Nigeria, born and bred. I live in India. I'm a retired recovering psychologist, clinical psychologist. I teach in a university. I'm a father. I'm a life partner to one of the most amazing creatures on earth. Well, post-activism is the name that I give to the idea that we need to slow down. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. It's paradoxical. When times are urgent, when things are urgent, you want to speed things up, right? You want to do more. You want to get in there. But I feel that we are in such a moment when our vision of our place in the world is changing. Our vision of ourselves as humans, our vision of our environment as resource, all these things are changing and we can no longer see ourselves in the same way. Now, this is not just a story we're telling ourselves. This is really concrete, consequential stuff. For instance, there's a whole story and narrative around climate change, and that climate change is just weather patterns disturbing the narrative of development. And so what do? We stop it. We do our best to stop climate change, or we do our best to adapt our systems so that we can mitigate the impacts of climate change. But just the phenomenon of climate change is bringing us to realize that we have and have always had an impact on the world. And as a result, we can no longer distinguish ourselves from the environment. We are not separate from the world that we claim to be part of. We are the environment. We are part of the world. And so there's an upsurge of wisdom coming from multiple disciplines, from biology to sociology to psychology to quantum physics, that is telling us a different story. What they're telling us is that we are relational beings. We are essentially non-essential. We are relationships. We are not things in a vacuum, in a container. We are the earth touching itself in a way. And that's a radical, very disturbing, frightening picture of what a human being is. As a result, we can no longer think of the self as the industrial capitalist self that is atomized and separate from all other selves. We have to think of the self as a connection, as a congealment of many other selves, as a congealment of ideas and geology and biology and all of that. Well, to cut the long story short, if the story has changed, then we can no longer act in the ways we've acted before. I think Einstein comes to mind when he says we can't approach, I'm paraphrasing him because I can't remember exactly how he put it, but we can't approach the problems with the same ideas or the same kinds of thinking that created the problems in the first place. So we need a new way of thinking about activism, about the environment, about ourselves, about our relationships, about technology. We have to rethink everything. So I am immersed in the fluidity and the streams of wisdom that are speaking these disturbing ideas, this disturbing but liberating ideas, framed the idea of post-activism. What comes to mind when we think of post-activism is after activism, post-activism, but that's not the idea. Is post a certain practice of activism. What happens when we stretch the conversation of activism and touch the largeness of our body? What if trees have some things to teach us? What if their capacities we're not aware of and ways of responding to crisis that we're not aware of, because we framed ourselves as this industrial, scarce, atomized beings? What if there are other ways of relating to the world that we have excluded? or we do not notice. So post-activism is an invitation not to find a special new way of solving our problems. It's not about solutions. It's about seeing the way we see. It's about questioning the questions we ask. It's about troubling our problems. It's about shaking the plots and the narratives that we're so used to. And it's opening a way for practices that hold space for all these kinds of deep, immersive exploration of what it means to be on the planet today. So in framing the idea of a thin place, I borrowed that from the Celtic pagan spiritualities, which speak about places in the world, or events that are so thin that it seems like the spiritual is pressing so hard on the fabric of the material that it's hard to escape. You know, we like this. Just noticing the sunrise could be a thin place. In my configuration, or in my understanding of a thin place, as it contributes to my understanding of post-activism, it's saying that we have to learn how to pay attention to what the world is doing, right? We have to find ways of listening to the world. There's a beautiful idea that I think is African. I read it in an African shaman's book, Malidoma Some, and he would talk about the elders pressing their ears to the ground. Those rituals, those ways of communing with the planet around us, with ourselves, with our grief, with our sorrow, with depression, with joy, with children, with grass, with sunlight, with sunrise, with dreams and moonlight and stars. Those ways are increasingly crowded out because we've become so busy, we've become so modern, and even the business of solving our problems is a business now. It's in the pipeline. And so there's no way of really slowing down to listen to what wants to be listened to, or what is speaking to us. There are thin places around us. In fact, I would say every moment is a thin moment, is a thin place. It's sacred. If we're entangled and co-embodied with the world around us, if the world isn't dead, then mountains are not resources, objects that are in the way. They're obstacles. They have a presence. They have agency, and they shape us. So maybe it might seem far-fetched to ask the question, what would a mountain think? But I think there's a poetic and deep, sacred and spiritual invitation there to ask the question about our environment. We tend to think of lawns, manicured lawns like this one, as just for our beauty, just for us to appreciate. But we are learning that the world is really alive. It has a say in how we emerge and how things emerge. So asking new questions is really the invitation here. So to ask, what would a mountain think? Well, that's a radical thing to do, but maybe we're trying to do the impossible. Maybe doing the impossible is what we should be doing right now.